Okay, so I have Alan Siegwarth, Jeff Schwab, and Charles Franz on the line here on a Zoom call. Thank you very much for joining us here, guys. We appreciate your time to take a minute and talk about this. So I guess we can start with you, Jeff. Can you talk a little bit about the search for 1744 and how it came to be that you guys found the perfect locomotive?
Sure. The Pacific Locomotive Association Board of Directors asked the steam department to start looking for a locomotive that would fit our line, which is a Southern Pacific line. And obviously a tender, as everybody knows that in the past we've been running tank engines, logging engines. There's nothing wrong with that, but they wanted something that would fit more to our Southern Pacific history. We had searched and looked at other locomotives around the West Coast, and we found out that the 1744 was becoming available. And we were liking the engine just because it's not too big and it's not too small. It should be able to pull our trains that we have on a regular basis with no problem. It definitely has a big enough tender with water. We won't have to worry about that on a regular operating day.
So in your search, because I would imagine that it must be kind of hard to find a used steam locomotive. I mean, I guess that's all you could find, but what other engines, what types of engines were you seeing out there? Like, because the 1744 is a mogul, right? It's a 260, isn't it?
Yes. 50% of the time, we're always running backwards.
Right.
So we wanted to find a locomotive that we'd be comfortable running backwards and forwards. The engines we have today running, like our Clover Valley Malley and our Robert Dollar number 3 and the Quincy number 2, they're a lot easier to running backwards and forwards. They were built that way, designed that way. So finding a larger locomotive, you want something that is comfortable running both directions. We did look at 282s. We were talking to somebody about one, but it was a login engine, but that didn't pan out. We were looking at other moguls, and that didn't pan out either. So yes, it is hard to find engines, especially museums that are willing to let them go, or organizations or cities or whatever willing to let them go. It's like you said, they're not everywhere. We're not in the 1950s anymore where there was engines and scrap lines or still in roundhouses sitting around. So yeah, it took a while to do research, make phone calls, not have people laugh at you and say, "Are you serious?" Yes, we're serious. We want to try on another project. Also add that the engines that we still have in our fleet, Shays and Heisler, it just doesn't really fit right now for what we have going forward. The Shay is nice, but it's slow. It wouldn't make it on the regular operations. The Heisler, it's a login engine, Club wants something that has a tender and looks more to the Southern Pacific style. So that's why we ventured out looking for another engine.
Right. So you found really what sounds like almost the perfect fit, or if not the perfect fit. I'm kind of curious then, and maybe you could speak to this, Charles, if you would like, about, what are the logistics of getting a piece of equipment like that across from wherever it came from. I think it came from Texas, didn't it, someplace? Or Colorado, I'm sorry.
If you talk about the history of the locomotive, it sort of came from all over. Also, to elaborate on what Jeff was saying, a big key sort of thing that I was always sort of after was the right size driver locomotive.
True.
Exactly. We've always run 44-inch drivers, which on most of our steam engines, which makes for a better tractive effort, starting longer trains, and not necessarily running at high speed, which we don't really do in the canyon. We go all of maybe 20 miles an hour at the most. And so with the 1744 drivers, it was sort of not too big, not too small. And that, I think that was a big factor in our decision as well. And of course, the history of the locomotive, West Coast. So yeah, speaking to where it came from, the engine ran on the SP. It was built in 1901. Ran on the Western Division, the San Joaquin Division, Los Angeles Division. So it was a Southern Pacific engine for its whole life before, and sort of tapped by the SP in the later years to run a lot of excursions, which actually one of our founding members got a chance to ride. And we have some slides from his collection from the 1744's last excursion on the Knights Landing branch outside of Sacramento. But the logistics, after the SP retired it went to Utah for a while on display. It went to the Heber Creeper, where they restored it to run. In fact, a few people have reached out to us that actually worked on the 1744 out of Utah, which was interesting. After that, it went to New Orleans. It was restored to run on the Gulf Coast, New Orleans and Gulf Coast Railroad, which had something to do with Texas. To be honest, I forget actually how.
Yeah, actually, Charles, it was in Texas, there in Grapevine, Fort Worth.
That's right.
And I actually looked at it back, I want to say it was around 2000. PLA was looking, and they knew it was for sale. And I went and looked at it and kind of decided that there was no way we would be able to afford to fix the thing. The firebox was shot, and it needed a lot of work. And we didn't have a lot of money back then, so it was like just the moving cost alone would have been a huge issue for our fledgling railroad. Yeah. So it kind of let it go, and then it ended up going to New Orleans from there.
I'd like to ask you a question, if I could, guys. You were mentioning early, Charles, about the 44-inch drivers on everything else, and I know that I read the specs on the 1744, but I don't remember what size are the drivers. Are they 44 or no?
They're 63.
Oh, okay. So it's really meant to go faster, isn't it?
It is, yeah. The SP liked those moguls. In fact, that's one of the reasons the old, turn of the century moguls sort of hung on for so long, as they're fairly light. They could run on a lot of the more dilapidated branch lines of the SP, but still be able to keep up with mainline speeds. They were light on their feet. They could traverse the small branch lines, but if they needed to get out on the main, they could do it. So that was, that to us is sort of a perfect melding, if you will, where not too tall, not too short, light on its feet, but still heavy enough to pull the longer trains that we've been wanting to pull.
Do you guys have any concerns about that, though? Because I know that the freight engines or the switching engines, like the tank engines that you've been using with the smaller drivers, are you anticipating any? Because I know there's a grade through the canyon. I mean, it's not a flat run.
No, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly, it's much heavier than our existing locomotive. Okay. So it's going to give us extra weight, more weight on the drivers. They're taller, so it's just going to give us more tractive effort and more speed if we need it.
Right.
But as far as moving it, it was fairly complicated. So all things put together, the locomotive ended up in Alamosa, Colorado, for the San Luis and Rio Grande Railroad, where they ran it for one season before it went down for some significant boiler work. And the parts sort of got scattered from there. The boiler went down south. Everything sort of scattered for several years while they were working on the restoration, before everything finally came back to San Luis, but unfinished. So 99% of the parts ended up back in Alamosa. And when Iowa Pacific, or at least the San Luis Rio Grande, went into receivership, we as an organization discussed it and figured, we needed to at least go out and kick the tires on everything and see if there's anything we were interested in. We went out sort of with an open mind. We went to look at the 1744, the LS&I 18 and the LS&I 20, which previously came from the Grand Canyon Railroad, and ended up there in Alamosa. We looked at those 3 steam engines and a few other cars and this and that. And while the 1744 certainly, needs a lot of work, it was the best choice for us. And then at that point, it was a matter of sort of circling the wagons and wading through a fair amount of, I don't want to say litigation, but certainly complication with the sale, and the receivership and the eventual bankruptcy of Iowa Pacific. But once all that got worked out, we brought a team of wonderful PLA volunteers that gave up an entire week of their jobs and families, and we all went out to Alamosa. And there were a lot of sort of wrenches that got thrown in the works. I won't go into great detail, but best laid plans. Ended up having to do a lot of pivoting and a lot of sort of quick work on our feet. And our success in that certainly was due to the very dedicated efforts of the other 2 folks on this call, and the folks that came out to Alamosa with us and put in long back-breaking days of lifting a steam locomotive part by part, really. And so we're actually not finished with the move yet. We're hoping to tie up the last loose strings in the next month or so. But,
so I have a question. So when you're talking about people going out and having to find the parts and all that, was it just in a yard and everything was scattered all over the place? So you really needed people to know what they were talking about or what they were looking for? Or did they have it mostly collected? I see Jeff laughing, so this might be a good question.
Certainly not. No. There were, I like to call it fields of debris. But I will, so actually I should say the folks at San Luis Rio Grande were also a huge help to us. I left that out. Of course, our volunteers, but they had certainly done their best in light of everything that was going on to keep everything contained, to keep the theft out. They really, that locomotive would not be in the shape that it's in right now if it weren't for the employees at San Luis Rio Grande. So while everything was kind of in several debris fields, they knew exactly what was where and which parts were where. And Alan and I flew out earlier when we made the initial inspection, and we basically cataloged everything where it was. But they also had a lot of steam locomotive parts that went to the LS&I engines. So there was a lot of, well, is that ours or is that theirs? And we had to do a lot of sort of thinking and math and is that a Baldwin throttle? Is that an SP? It was a lot. And we ended up, being very diligent and, marking what we decided was ours, and that went into the contract, and it was very specific. It's not the first time the PLA has purchased a pile of parts as a locomotive. So,
No.
we did the same thing with the Robert Dollar 3. It was a pile of parts, and same with 1744. So we basically just were very diligent about making sure everything was wrangled and marked, and that we took it with us.
It kind of comes to an interesting point, I think, that there are people around, that would be you guys, who know enough to recognize what you actually do need. I think that's kind of cool. And, we're talking 60 or 70 years after steam was gone from, really, what do you call it? Large use, I guess you could call it.
Mhm.
So there's a level of knowledge I think that comes into play. That's, to me, it's just impressive that you guys know enough to know what you're looking at and pick up the right stuff. That's pretty cool.
We'll find out if we have
right when you're putting it all together. So but now so most of it's here. I mean, the rest of it's going to be here at some point, probably in the near future. So, and I guess, Alan, if you want, you could talk to this. What happens? I mean, all the parts are finally there. You must have a process, right? You make a list, and you have to go through, like building a model. You have to make a specific list so that you're not having to go back and do something. Oh, that won't fit now because we already put this other stuff on here. Do you know what I mean? Like, is that a part of the process?
That sounds good in theory. There's no guarantee that will happen.
Well, right. My point though is that you have to be methodical, right? I mean, you can't just okay, just put all this stuff together, right?
Yeah. So I mean, one we looked, like Jeff said, we looked at many locomotives. One advantage to this engine is it's already taken apart. Now, whether that's advantage, that's debatable. But right at this point, the boiler's been sent out, and a lot of work was done to it. There's a lot more work that still needs to be done, but all the majority of the parts are there. So it's a fairly straightforward reassembly of the firebox and put the tubes in. So that's something we're gonna have a shop or a contractor do that work for us. That way we get the boiler back in one piece. There's a lot of welding because the whole firebox has been cut out of it. So one of the advantages to this locomotive when we talked about getting it is when we get done with this project, this engine will have practically a brand new boiler. I mean, this boiler will be good for the PLA for 50 years at least. Not that you won't have to work on it, but we're starting from a good point. And then like the frame, which is still in Colorado that we're going to move soon, most of the parts have been taken off of it, which is an advantage because we can look at it, inspect things. We don't have everything. A lot of it you got to take off to look at stuff. So it's already taken off. We'll start working on the running gear, looking and inspecting. We don't suspect we're going to find any huge surprises, but we can go through each piece, and then as we put it on, we can check stuff and slowly reassemble the locomotive there in the canyon. So that's kind of the program. At least that's what we're hoping the program is.
Right. So now here's a question, and I'm sure that most of the people watching are probably anxious to know, how long will it take? And I know that there's always a nebulous part to that answer because you really don't know until you're working on the thing. But do you have some kind of a goal for yourselves, like less than 50 years, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, none of us want 50 years because we won't be around to see it run. But.
That's why I said less than 50.
Yeah.
No, I mean the plan when we acquired it, we kind of put together a schedule of what we want to do with it, and we're hopeful we can get this thing running in 5 to 6 years.
Oh, okay,
that's kind of our goal. A lot of that hinges on funding. Like any other project in the restoration world, fixing costs money. So we've one of the reasons we spaced it out over 5 years is we were hoping we could stomach the costs of doing the work a little bit at a time rather than, if we have the boiler work done and it could get done in 6 months, but the organization doesn't have the money to pay to get it done in 6 months. So we stretch it out. We can pay a little bit every year, and then it'll be done, and then it'll come back, and then we'll have a lot of work to reassemble the locomotive, put the boiler on the frame and all the plumbing and stuff. So that's our plan. I mean, no sooner did we go to Colorado and get all the parts, then COVID came along and the railroad hasn't been running, so we're not bringing any revenue in. And so, like I said, it's going to be driven by money, the schedule, but we're excited to get cracking on the frame and the running gear because we can do a lot of that ourselves. So.
Yeah. Do you have some idea about once they do get here, how soon? I mean, because with COVID, I know that there's been some hesitation by the organization to have people coming down to work on stuff. I know, if I remember right, I thought I had an email or something from somebody that they were like, no, nobody can come because somebody tested positive for COVID or, something like that. Is that going to throw a wrench into the whole getting started once the pieces are here?
Well, maybe. I mean, we we're all living it. We just live it a day at a time with what's going on. So we've been doing work a little bit at the yard and trying to do it safely. So when time comes, we'll move forward and try to continue that.
So it's really just a step at a time, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
One day at a time.
But I mean, everybody in our group is super excited to get started on it. Kind of frustrated we're at home not working on it, but
yeah,
we'll get there.
But you also got to remember that we still have the Skookum that we are graciously borrowing for this year, and we have 2 other steam locomotives. And I don't know if everybody knows, but our staff is not huge. I mean, on a regular basis, we have maybe 2 guys, maybe 3 guys down there on weekends when we're actually open. Right, Alan? I mean, you're not talking about a lot of volunteers. So we're always looking for more volunteers to try to keep everything going. We still have to produce with our regular steam locomotives on running once we open up again. And rebuild the 1744. There's no back shop separate crew. So the guys you see running the locomotives or getting them ready are also rebuilding engines.
Right.
It's a lot of work, a lot of time and effort. So we're always looking for skilled people. We're always looking for money to help. So that we can contract things out so we can get these projects out faster. But without volunteers and out money, it's going to take time. That's why we schedule it further out.
Right. That was something actually that I wanted to touch on during this talk too, because I know that it's like that. I've been around long enough and been a member of the PLA long enough to understand, and we talked about this when we talked in the yard about for the Steamfest video that we did a few years ago, that people don't realize how much work goes into everything. So what can people do? Say someone's watching and they're like, wow, I want to help. Okay. There's 2 things I think that people can do that are obvious to me. One is to volunteer, like what you're talking about. And the other thing is to donate money. So how do they do that? Don't you guys have a page set up for the 1744 project? And can they go to, Niles Canyon Railway or NCRy I think it's .org to go and volunteer? Or what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, I mean, they can go to the www.nilesncry.org. And there's several places you can donate on there. There's a section for, how can I help? 1744 is high on the list of projects that need money donated. The steam department has a separate website that has a lot of pictures and history and of work on our other locomotives in the past as we were rebuilding them. And of course, we've added a section for the 1744, which we'll update as things move along so people can kind of go to the website and see what we're doing, what we're working on. We found that, people are really interested to see what's happening as time progresses. And then certainly the membership applications are also on the website, and we're always looking for new members. The organization has jobs for just about any type of skill, and none of us came to the PLA knowing about steam locomotives.
No.
Right.
We've all kind of learned on the job, and I think the PLA is a historical preservation organization. But I always like to say one of the key things we do beyond restoring and preserving equipment is preserving the knowledge and the skills that are needed to maintain the equipment. Because if you don't have that, the equipment is not going to run long. This stuff isn't complicated, but in a lot of ways, it's a lost art, and there's techniques and things you need to know, and that we try to glean that and learn. Jeff and I have been doing it for way longer than we want to admit. We're always learning something from somebody, or we get into something that we don't know where we are. We call people or talk to other people in the industry, and it's just it's an important thing to kind of keep the knowledge base growing in the heritage railway business.
Well, so assume someone's watching who really doesn't know anything about steam engines. They can still help, right? I mean, because you still have to sand stuff, or isn't there still something for people to do, even if they don't know how to work on steam engines already?
Absolutely. Steam engines are a dirty animal, and there's a lot of work involved with cleaning, painting, that type of thing. Even on the running ones, you got greasing, cleaning. It doesn't take a lot of skill, but it's stuff that's got to get done, and every set of hands helps. So.
Right. And I can imagine, I've had this this example with people before, that I used to be a house painter, and we would paint a house, and there's nothing like standing back at the curb at the end of the day or at the end of the job and saying, wow, that looks really good. And I can't imagine that you don't get something similar to that feeling of satisfaction when you get to see these machines running up and down the canyon, or in your guys' case, get to actually run the machines up and down the canyon. I think that must be a really satisfying feeling to get. And for right? So for people to come in and be able to help in whatever way they can, they'll have some piece of that, in 5 or 6 years, whenever the 1744 is running again. And I would think could be a very good motivating factor for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think we all sort of started in the same boat. I may not be quite as seasoned as Alan and Jeff.
You're not saying these guys are old, are you?
No, heavens no. But same. Alan started, laying track, and Jeff started in the pit. I started in the pit. I don't know how many times I cleaned out the pit, but yeah, when you see all the smiling faces on Sunday operations, or if we're doing a photo charter, and you get to stand back and watch, a literal piece of history roll by, that's pretty cool, and it's nice to be able to know that you contributed to that.
Yeah, and even small things, John. I'm thinking back to the 3. We got the 3. It was just a frame with no wheels under it, and it sat.
Frame and boiler.
Yeah, it sat in our shop for years on blocks. And the day we were able to lower it down and set it on the wheels, it was nowhere near running. But that was a major accomplishment. We really, that was a happy event, and very emotional because how long everybody had worked towards it. So we always like to see them run, but there's times in between when, as you're going through the process, they're big events. And you'll work months to get to one of those big events. That's Charlie mentioned track work. Jeff and I both started building track out there. And the nice thing about building track is at the end of the day, you look back, look at that. There's another 500 feet of track that we built. It's immediate gratification. This working on mechanical stuff, sometimes it takes a while to get to the point where you can see what you've done, you know?
Yeah.
It is hard to try to keep people enthusiastic when, you might be cleaning up bolts or a frame part, but, we're always looking for those people that just want to keep things moving along and things maintained. And that's for everywhere out there, from the diesels to the track to the signals to the cars and to our department. And it just takes a lot of time and effort that the usual person that comes out doesn't see. They don't see the person coming out at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the morning to get the engine ready, when they just have a flashlight checking on things and whatnot to get things started.
Right.
So we're always looking for those type of people. It's not always a glorious job of being, blowing the whistle and pulling the throttle, but it takes a team, and a team makes it work. And we understand that. And we try to make sure that everybody knows that they are special in that team.
Something else I would think is worthy of mention is that, you talk about dirty jobs or cleaning bolts or whatever, it's all stuff that has to get done too. So even if someone is just doing this sort of grunt work, they're helping. And I think there's a sense of, there can easily be a sense of accomplishment with that too. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we try to make a point with everybody, step back at the end of the day, or maybe not the every day, but the end of the month or wherever you get to a point, and think about what all went into putting something back together. So,
Right.
I wanted to say that it is amazing for our group that we kept this project under wraps for so long until we made the announcement. Everybody knows in this railroad world that everybody wants to be the first one to speak about it. And I'm really proud of our group of keeping a lid on it until we were able to announce what we were doing. I think that's huge, especially nowadays.
Yeah. We talked about that a little bit earlier this week, Alan and I, because I was asking the question, why is it always so secretive? Since you brought it up, Jeff, you want to kind of comment about that? Why is it always so secretive when a group is trying to acquire a locomotive, or maybe a locomotive is going to move to another location? What do you think is the mystery? Why so?
I can say from experience, and Alan can agree, when we went after the Robert Dollar number 3 and certain people found out that we were acquiring the number 3, parts disappeared.
Right.
Really unique parts that we had to take the time and effort and have parts machined and made, and spent a lot of money on it and had to do the engineering. And so with that in the back of our mind, we have to be quiet. As Charlie said, the parts were spread everywhere. Somebody could take a widget and it's gone. And then we have to make a new one, which costs more money, more time and effort. And so, yes, we have to be quiet about certain things. We don't want things walking away. It just bit us before. So I was really proud of our group holding it together so we could get everything, especially the smaller parts, picked up and moved.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, truthfully, John, the acquisition process, I mean, that went on for 4 months, I think. And there were a couple times where it looked like the deal was going to fall through. So announcing a deal before the deal is done is probably not a good idea.
Right.
So that's another issue. You know, you can talk about it, but there's legal stuff going on that you don't want any outside influence affecting. So.
Right. All right. Well, I really want to thank you guys for taking the time to talk, Jeff and Charles and Ellen. Really appreciate it. I think that the acquisition of this locomotive is a really great story because it's almost like a piece of original equipment coming home in a way, just because it did work out in our area before in its heyday. And I really wanted to share that with the audience here. So I thank you very much for joining us here. And we'll make sure to get the word out as much as possible so that maybe people who want to help can come help, or people who can't help physically but can help with a donation can do that. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.